Well, hello there. This is our last week together. It'll be a quick week. Congregation as an emotional system. Now, everything that has been said so far about emotional processes within the family is just as applicable to congregations. Friedman says on page 195, quote, emotional process in religious organization not only mirrors emotional processes in personal families, but also both types of family systems plug into one another. This is a major reason why unresolved issues in any of the clergy's three families can produce symptoms in one of the others, and why within the emotional interlock often lies the key to knowledge or to further stress. End quote. Of all work systems, the one that functions most like a family is the church. Why is this? Well, I've already said it is difficult for clergy to distinguish from home life and congregational life. There's greater intimacy in the church system. The intensity with which some lay ministers are invested in their church makes the church the prime arena for their displacement of important unresolved family issues. And I said lay minister, what I meant is pastors, ministers, but lay ministers as well. Now, in the book by Parson and Lees, they discuss these different approaches to organizational problems. There's basically a difficult people approach, a problem-solving approach, and a systems approach. The difficult people approach, organizational problems are seen as caused by what people do or do not do. This approach would have you address the person. The classic examples like the bee in the bonnet. You address that person, try to fix that person. There is a problem-solving approach as well. Some analysts will pay attention to the problems the organization is facing. The issues, questions get solved or resolved when the disputants come to an agreement or make a decision. The problem with this approach is that making a decision may not solve the underlying problem, particularly if the parties involved are incompetent. Of course, the systems approach does not deny that there may be difficult persons or problems that the organization may need to deal with. But it observes the reactive patterns or non-conscious agreements or understandings that people have about how they are supposed to act and get along. Let me mention briefly homeostasis and patterns. Why is it that people in churches tend to sit in the same pews? Why is it that aerobic dancers tend to have a penchant for the same spot on the mat? Why do students sit in the same seats during class? Why do individuals in marriage tend to sleep on the same side of the bed? What would it look like if these things were not so? We could not depend on others to sit in the same place, follow agreed upon rules, or take various roles within an organization. I think one of the fascinating examples of this is getting on a Southwest Airlines flight. Everyone just kind of knows, if you've flown enough, you just kind of know that you don't sit in the middle seat initially. You sit on the aisle or next to the window. What would happen if someone went down to an empty row and sat in the middle seat? This does, of course, happen when someone's trying to save seats or stuff, but people just kind of know you don't do that, right? Systems theorists call this tendency of people in relationship, this tendency of people in relationships to develop patterns and keep doing the same things the same way, homeostasis. Once an organization or system gets in motion, it tends to keep going in the same way. Homeostasis is the tendency for a system, relationship, or organization to mold the behavior of others into predictable patterns, making it possible for us to get along, do work, to find safety, to trust. Now, there are agreements in systems. Systems continue because of agreements or contracts that people make with each other. There are three types of contracts. The first one is formal. When the contract is made, everyone knows it's on the table, so to speak. Examples of this might be like church constitutions, a contract between a minister and a church, marriage vows, etc. There are also informal contracts. This is an understanding in which the parties are aware a bargain is being made and communicate directly about their role. So, for example, like in a staff meeting, especially when minutes are not kept. Hey, could you pick up the snacks for the retreat? Sure, no problem. That kind of informal agreement. There are tacit agreements. Has to do with the habits or patterns people establish as they interact over time. So, for example, hey, that's my seat. Um, you Another example is you expect so and so to call when they are running late because that's what they've always done. Like typically, when I leave home for work, I leave work for home. I will text my wife to let her know. She expects me to do that. So there are three types of contracts: formal, informal, and tacit. And then there are four categories of these contracts. Four categories. So if you were making kind of a grid, place formal, informal, and tacit across the top. Those are the three types of contracts. And then the categories of contracts you do here at on the side: rules, roles, rituals, and goals. Rules, roles, rituals, and goals. Rules, pretty straightforward. They're rules. Roles are a form of agreement that has to do with responsibility. Who does what and with how much authority. Rituals impacts rituals impact the way a system functions. They help us get through transitions into and out of relationships, moving into new positions, recognizing changes that take place with the system or the larger environment, a wedding. We know change is taking place. Goals. Generally straightforward. If a system's formal or informal goals contradict their tacit goals, if the system's formal or informal contracts contradict their tacit contracts, the tacit contracts will probably win out. Formal goals go on paper. Tacit goals are in the heart. One way to think about it. So, when you think about formal, informal, and tacit, rules, roles, and rituals, think of a kind of a grid. Here are examples, thinking about the category of rules and formal type. Might be like bylaws, like standard operating procedures. What are informal rules? Special cases, spoken guided lines, like crying babies go to the nursery, that kind of idea. What are tacit rules? Norms, dress codes. You know, you don't wear those kinds of things. In more conservative churches of Christ, you don't serve the table without a tie. That's kind of a tacit rule. It's not written down anywhere. Kind of another tacit rule is you don't talk about politics, that kind of thing. What are formal roles? Pastor will be a formal role. A youth deacon, a secretary will be a formal role. What's an informal role? Someone who kind of takes the position, I'm the devil's advocate, you know, I kind of play that role. Or I'm the one who gets things done. That's kind of an informal role. A tacit role, those people who are like the conflict smoothers, the gatekeeper, the matriarch, the flack catcher is the one who's always catching all the flack, you know, that kind of person. What are the what's a formal ritual? Sunday worship could be a formal ritual, a baptism ceremony, serving, practicing communion, that kind of thing. Informal rituals, going out for ice cream after winning a game might be an informal example. What about a tacit ritual? We have greeting rituals, door greeters, shaking hands. These are tacit, these things that we just all kind of understand. What are formal goals? Formal goals. Preach the word, uplifting worship. These are kind of formal. These are often written down. Informal goals might be, you know, we want to get new members. We'll kind of, maybe kind of save towards a new auditorium. it is possible that informal can move to a formal. And by the way, these aren't rigid categories, they're generalizations. Tacit goals might, hey, let's grow old together, we want to be here and grow old together. So kind of have the idea. Um, let's kind of look at the big picture here. Um, uh, there are people who have this idea that this is my part of the congregation, like a ladies' ministry, the Holy of Holies. You know what Holy of Holies is? It's that place that is padlocked with special keys, and only ladies have the access to the flowers and the tablecloths and things, the china. It's where all the china, flowers, all that stuff. The finance committee. The most important thing is paying the bills. The evangelist. Most important thing is evangelism, door knocking, bus ministry. Most important thing is taking care of the bus. Everybody has their special. It's their part of the congregation. This is an interesting aspect of ministry that we must think about. When people have a difficult time seeing beyond what is happening in their small part of the system, they hold the belief that their ministry is the most important, and they find it difficult to empathize with other parts when all the different parts come to the table and fight for money for the next budget year, as an example. As a minister, we must be able to see all the various parts as a whole. So thinking systemically means that the parts of the whole take into consideration the needs of the other parts and the needs of the system as a whole. Also, quote, systemic thinking assumes multiple causes, not a simple cause. It assumes that there are many contributing factors to any given set of circumstances. So as we continue to think about and understand our congregation as a system, let's consider 7 dimensions that encompass both key organizational functions and the way people function in church life. These address pivotal structural and leadership dimensions that describe the organizational dynamics that shape ministry in a congregation. Now, each of these, I'm going to present them as on a continuum. There will be a planned end of the scale and a spontaneous end of the scale. We, of course, want to live in the tension, live in that center, that which is often the most difficult, but perhaps the healthiest place to be. So the first dimension is strategy. Strategy is the way the congregation puts their vision into practice. Of course, the Holy Spirit, prayer, all of that is assumed through all of these, okay? A strategy assesses congregation's attitude about the future, either rigidly planning for the future or completely spontaneous. So on the planned, P-L-A-N-N-E-D, end of the scale, enables a congregation to develop a clear sense of purpose and direction. On the spontaneous end, allows a congregation to maintain an openness to God's leading. Can't see into the future kind of deal. Living in the tension, sometimes it's uncomfortable. But this tension between good planning and an openness towards new opportunities is healthy. So strategy. Second is authority. This is the ability to influence decision making in the congregation. On the concentrated end of the scale, may refer to authority given by a role that has the right to make decisions or act on behalf of others. When a person has had both expertise in a field and is given the role or authority, the organization can grow dependent on that concentrated authority. On the dispersed end, each of these is going to have different names. On the dispersed end of the scale, decision making is distributed among a number of people. So the concentrated authority is concentrated in an individual. On the dispersed end, it is distributed among members, number of people. Living in the tension, the ability to move back and forth. The reality is you must be able to move back and forth. This enables a congregation to utilize these 2 types of authority. You need the experts, you need the person who has the experience, who can take that authority, but not to what's the language I'm looking for? Not to forget others who have skills and gifting. So living in that tension is important. Number 3, process. This scale, this dimension measures both the information sharing and decision making procedures in a congregation. And so in this scale, you have the mandatory end and the discretionary end. On the mandatory end, provides clear organizational maps or guidelines. People know what's going on. There's little ambiguity. Everyone knows their role and their authority. But on the discretionary end of the scale, this process encourages individual initiative in terms of problem solving, seeks to avoid undue constraints that create dependency. Living in the tension on this scale, congregations that are able to take both poles seriously maintain a healthier tension. You need some clear direction, organizing principles, but you also need to encourage people to take initiative, to solve problems, so there's not undue constraints. All right, the next scale is pastoral leadership. This is the way the pastor goes about generating intended change in the church system. On this scale, you have the managerial end, and on the other side, you have transformational. On the managerial, pastors are aware of the needs of the congregation. They organize resources to address the goals or address the needs. On the transformational end, this pastor focuses on future possibilities and invests energy in shaping a vision that lives into that future. They inspire others to create change. The reality is a pastor needs to be both. A pastor must either operate out of both poles, operate out of one, but surround themselves with people from the other, or they will have an inclination towards one while trying to develop the other. So a pastor must be aware of both. All right, on the relatedness scale. This scale measures the way members of an organization work together, especially whether their work is done cooperatively or independently. So on this scale, you have the collegial end and the individual. Collegial emphasizes cooperative efforts within the congregation as a whole to do the work of ministry. On the individual, people working independently from each other. A premium is placed on individual initiative, encourages the free expression of ideas, and encourages difference. Living in the tension, when a congregation lives in the tension here, or when a pastor leads in this direction, they can take the initiative, but also explore its impact on others. The driving force of the tension is not self-interest, but self-interest tempered by the interest of the larger group. Now, the next dimension is lay leadership, and it has the same managerial and transformational poles as pastoral leadership. It's much the same as pastoral leadership. It is the ability to live in the tension of a managerial and transformational style. And finally, and last, learning scale. Measures a congregation's orientation toward the past or the future as it experiments with improving its life and ministry. So in this scale, you have the maximizing end and the metamizing end. The maximizing attention is fixed on the past. What are our strengths? What are our resources? Why should we create something new, etc., etc., etc. On the metamizing, looks beyond the congregation's current strengths to develop something new. Living in the tension, leader of the church knows the congregation's current distinctive competencies and helps celebrate those, but also experiments with new possibilities for ministry. So let me repeat those just quickly. These 7 dimensions: strategy with the planned end and spontaneous; authority, concentrated end, dispersed end; process, mandatory end of the scale, discretionary end; pastoral leadership, managerial end, transformational end; relatedness, collegial, individual; lay leadership, managerial, transformational; and then learning, maximizing, metamizing. The idea is to kind of live in the tension. When you see the congregation as a whole, And you begin to see the parts and how they work together, how the emotional processes fit together, how homeostasis is sustained and disrupted. You begin to see greater opportunity, greater possibility for moving forward. So, thank you. Hope that provides. Hope that is helpful as you consider congregation as an emotional system. Blessings and peace.